Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're gonna be cutting straight to the core of one of Providence, Rhode Island's most enduring and frankly most terrifying cold cases.
We are. We're talking about the death of Robert Blake in the summer of 1935.
And this deep dive, it's a bit unusual. We're not just laying out a sequence of events. We're really wrestling with a fundamental, a complete contradiction in the evidence right from the start.
That's right, because the official ruling, the one that went into the books, it treated Blake's death as, well, as straightforward.
Straightforward. How?
It said it was either a random, violent electrical shock, a lightning strike on College Hill, or just, nervous tension, that the massive storm got to him and his heart gave out.
But the sources we have, and we're talking primarily about Blake's own frenzied diary, which was then confirmed by investigation notes and some very, very real physical discoveries.
They suggest something else entirely.
Completely. They suggest that the electricity, that lightning strike, it wasn't the cause. It was merely the delivery system for something far, far older and darker.
So that's our mission here. We're going to immerse ourselves and you in the horrific reality that Robert Blake reported, what he saw, what he thought he saw, what he suffered through.
And what ultimately destroyed him. We're laying out all the physical and psychological evidence so that you can judge for yourself.
And it is crucial, I think, to understand that this split in opinion, it wasn't something that developed over time. It was immediate, violent. The moment his body was found, two irreconcilable narratives started fighting for control of the facts.
Let's just call them the skeptics and the believers. I think that's the easiest way to frame it, because understanding that opposition is key to everything that follows.
Okay, so the skeptics, they were backed by the official investigation, and they were, to put it mildly, dismissive.
They pointed to the fact that the window Blake was facing was completely unbroken, so their argument was, how could any physical force have entered his study from the outside?
Exactly. For them, his death had to be internal. A profound nervous shock, something that happened inside his own body.
And his diary, the core of our evidence.
Useless to them. They basically categorized him as having a fantastic imagination. They pointed to his entire life, his entire career as a writer and a painter, which was dedicated solely to myth, to terror, to the occult.
They even brought up a previous visit he made to the city, didn't they? One that also ended badly.
They did. A morbid trip that ended, and I quote, amidst death and flame. So for them, this was just proof of an unstable nature. They saw the whole affair as either wild, exaggerated fiction or
stupendous hoax, one that he just failed to complete.
And all the weird details found in that vacant church up on Federal Hill.
Just charlatanry, that's the word they used. Tricks left behind by the long-gone cult members to frighten the locals. So that's the official story. Fiction and fear are what killed Robert Blake.
But then you have the believers. And the believers have the physical proof. They clung to that diary like a roadmap to a terrifying reality.
And they started verifying things. They proved that the unorthodox Starry Wisdom sect was a real thing, that it existed in Providence long before 1877.
They confirmed the genuineness of that ancient church record Blake found, the one he later deciphered. This wasn't something he made up. It was a real historical artifact.
And here's the big one for me. More damningly, they confirmed the recorded disappearance of a specific person, a reporter named Edwin M. Lillibridge.
Vanished in 1893. A legitimate cold case, directly tied to that exact building Blake was investigating.
So this proves the cult's activities were tied to concrete, deadly outcomes, decades after the sect had supposedly just packed up and left.
And then there's the evidence on Blake's body itself. I mean, this wasn't just a simple nervous collapse.
No. Witnesses described his features as frozen in a look of monstrous, transfiguring fear.
It's not a heart attack face. That's the look of someone watching the absolute worst thing imaginable happen to them. It's a look of cosmic horror, not just a sudden cardiac arrest from a loud thunderclap.
Okay, but here is the single most compelling piece of physical evidence. The one the skeptics can't just brush aside.
Dr. Dexter.
Dr. Dexter. We have the documented action of a highly reputable local physician. If this was all just a hoax, if Blake just scared himself to death, why did Dr. Dexter become so utterly convinced of the danger of the cult's main artifact?
The curiously angled stone and its strangely adorned metal box.
He was so convinced that he took it upon himself to retrieve it and throw it into the deepest channel of Narragansett Bay.
He literally committed an act of evidence destruction. He said he was ridding the earth of something too dangerous to remain.
And a respected physician, he doesn't risk his reputation, maybe even legal trouble, to destroy the props from some writer's fictional hoax.
No, he doesn't. That single act validates the diary's reality more than any single written entry Blake ever made.
So that's our starting point. We're going to proceed from the standpoint that Robert Blake was telling the truth, that he was pulled into something that started as simple, artistic inspiration.
But that it quickly, very quickly, deteriorated into a siege on his mind, his body, and his soul.
So let's begin. Let's go to the start of his fatal obsession.
All right. Robert Blake arrives in Providence. It's the winter of 1934-35. He rents the upper floor of a venerable old Georgian home. It's near the Brown University campus, a really historic, quiet spot on the crest of College Hill.
It sounds like the perfect setup for a writer and a painter, really. The sources call it a little garden oasis in a comfortable antique part of the city.
And his study was positioned perfectly, a large chamber that overlooked the city to the west. And it's right there, at his desk, that this entire drama unfolds.
Because his window commanded what's called a splendid view of the lower town, and critically, of the magnificent mystical sunsets.
The sunsets really do set the stage, because Blake, with his predisposition toward the strange and the mythological, he wasn't just looking at a normal city view.
No, he was gazing across a gulf of 2 miles, over the urban sprawl to where it gave way to the spectral hump of Federal Hill, which rose up against the deep purple slopes of the western countryside.
And for Blake, this wasn't just another part of the city. He wrote that he felt it was an unknown, ethereal world. He felt it was somehow magically linked to the unreal marvels and monsters he was already creating in his own art.
So he was, psychologically, he was already primed to believe that a different kind of reality existed over there.
And that psychological tuning, it just manifested immediately in his creative work that winter. He used a north attic room as his studio, and he was just pouring out these highly specific pieces of cosmic horror.
We have the titles, don't we?
We do. He was working on stories like The Burrower Beneath, The Stairs in the Crypt, and Shag-Eye. His paintings featured nameless, unhuman monsters, genuinely alien, non-terrestrial landscapes.
So he wasn't just writing fiction in a vacuum. He was, in a way, psychically preparing the canvas for the very horrors that would later come for him.
His mind was an antenna, basically.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And of all the distant visual static from that view, one single object started to focus his gaze.
The church.
A huge, dark, vacant stone church situated right there, prominently on Federal Hill. And when the sun would go down, its great tower and its black, tapering steeple would just loom dramatically against the flaming sky.
We can really picture this place clearly. The records say it was built around 1810 to 1815. It was in an early, very grim, very austere Gothic revival style.
Stained black with a century of industrial smoke and storms, and you could just tell it was abandoned. Its vast windows never showed a single light.
But the abandonment, that wasn't the only thing that made it ominous. Blake was a very keen observer. He was constantly using his field glasses.
And he noted this vague, singular aura of desolation around it, which he later confirmed physically. The building wasn't just shunned by people, it was shunned by nature.
Right. Unlike all the other belfries in the city, which, they teemed with pigeons and swallows.
The smoky eaves of the spire were utterly empty. He wrote that no birds ever rested there.
And that detail it's just deeply chilling. It suggests a kind of a biological revulsion to the taint of that place, something that even the animal kingdom would instinctively avoid.
So by spring, this intellectual fascination had become something else. It was malignant, full-blown obsession.
It completely derailed him. His planned novel, which was about a witch cult, it just stalled. The focus of his fear shifted entirely to that object in the distance.
The hill, which was once just, artistic inspiration, it became a source of this nagging psychological pull, a deep, increasing restlessness. His view to the west had gone from inspiring to commanding.
Which culminates in his decision in late April. He couldn't just look at it anymore. He felt compelled to cross the city, to traverse those 2 miles, and to enter that fabulous sloop into the smoke-wreathed world of dream.
He had to investigate the source of his new morbid creativity, even if it meant stepping directly into his own pre-drawn fate.
And that journey, his initial trip to Federal Hill, it instantly underscores what a strange, isolated cultural pocket this neighborhood was, despite being so close to the city center.
It's like he's crossing a border. He has to navigate these bleak, decayed downtown squares, moving past the recognizable city.
And then find the ascending avenue of century-worn steps. It's described as feeling like entering a different country. The signs on the shops are foreign. The crowds have these strange, dark faces. It was a community that was clearly resistant to any outside intrusion.
And funnily enough, he initially couldn't even find it. He couldn't find the landmark he'd been watching for months. For a moment, he actually convinced himself the whole hill was just a phantom, a dream world only visible from his study window.
Which just shows you the power of the obsession, right?
Yeah.
It was blurring the line between reality and the supernatural before he even set foot in the church.
But when he started asking for directions, that cultural isolation, it turned into something much more active. It turned into palpable fear.
The first shopkeeper, he asked. Blake noted he spoke fluent English, but he just smiled and shook his head. Insisted he knew nothing. Basically denied the building's existence.
And the second merchant he tried was even worse.
Blake was certain the man was feigning ignorance. He said his face was just gripped by this palpable fear. And crucially, as he was denying knowing anything, the man made a curious sign with his right hand.
This wasn't just avoidance. This was a defense mechanism, a locally established gesture against a known evil, and it was instantly triggered just by the mention of that dark spire.
Blake was smart enough to get the message. He realized the topic was forbidden, so he just followed the side of the spire, his only reliable guide, and plunged into these squalid, unpaved lanes, not daring to question anyone else.
He had walked right into a pocket of terror where the community was actively and silently protecting its secrets.
He finally reaches it, a windswept cobblestone square. And the church itself, it's set apart. It's 6 feet above the street on this raised, iron-railed, weed-grown plateau.
And the close-up view just confirms the decay. Fallen buttresses, missing stone mullions. But the massive, century-old doors were tightly locked. It was sealed.
And this is where we get the first narrative confirmation of the local legend from someone other than Blake himself. He approaches a patrolman.
A great, wholesome Irishman, as Blake describes him.
Who immediately reacts by making the sign of the cross and muttering that people never ever speak of that building.
But he does speak. Reluctantly, the officer gives up the core details of the legend, that this was the site of the bad sect, the Starry Wisdom sect.
And they once used the place to call up awful things from some unknown gulf of night. This isn't just a vague ghost story. This is specific local intelligence about cosmic summoning.
The officer's information was also vital because it helps us understand the entity's limitations.
Right. He said the entity fled light and was banished by strong light, which meant the cult had to keep resummoning it. It wasn't a permanent presence.
And he specified that the sect members fled like rats in 1877. That date is important. It's when disappearances started being minded or, investigated by the locals.
So 1877 is our endpoint for the open operation of the cult. But the officer's final warning was just chilling. He told Blake the building should be left alone, lest things be stirred that ought to rest forever in their black abyss.
Any sane person would have heard that and turned right back around.
But Blake's obsession was well past sanity at this point.
So he finds his way in. On the north side of the rusted iron fence, he finds missing bars, conveniently left open or maybe created a long time ago. They gave him access to the yard.
And as he slips through, the collective fear of the neighborhood is just on full display. The few people in the square, they edge away from him. They make that same strange sign with their right hands.
And several windows are slammed shut. They were literally sealing themselves off from the inevitable consequence of his intrusion.
He checks the main doors, finds them locked, and goes around to the rear. And there it is, a yawning and unprotected cellar window.
He crawls in. He's in this massive, debris-strewn, dust-carpeted vault. The only thing in there are the rusted remains of an old furnace, showing use only up to mid-Victorian times.
The church had been cold for decades. A very long time.
And from this subterranean foundational space, he finds stone steps, raising up into the darkness, leading him toward a dimly lit corridor.
He's moving from the solid, verifiable reality of the basement into the absolute core of the cosmic horror waiting for him above.
Once Blake gets up to the ground floor, he moves quickly, but the unsettling symbolism is just constant. He's in this colossal nave, and he describes it as an almost eldritch place, a scene of just total decay.
It felt suffocatingly old. He talks about mountains of dust over the box pews, the altar, the pulpit, titanic ropes of cobweb hanging everywhere.
And the light filtering through the blackened apsidal windows was this hideous leaden light. It just reinforced the sense of rot and total abandonment.
But what immediately told him this was not a normal abandoned church was the symbolism. The obscured windows, they were blackened with soot, but you could still make out these strange designs.
The few saints that were depicted had, as he put it, expressions distinctly open to criticism. suggesting a kind of twisted heretical worship.
And bizarrely, one window showed only a dark space with spirals of curious luminosity, maybe a cryptic representation of something cosmic, not religious.
And then above the altar, the most glaring sign of apostasy. The cross wasn't the standard Christian symbol.
No, it was the primordial ankh, or crux ansata of ancient Egypt.
For anyone unfamiliar with this, the ankh is often called the key of life, but in these occult contexts, it symbolizes vastly older pre-Christian traditions, often tied to chthonic or even extraterrestrial powers.
Its presence here basically signaled that the Starry Wisdom sect placed itself completely outside of any known human theology. They were looking instead toward truly ancient sources of power.
The real shock, though, the positive shock of objective, undeniable horror, came in the vestry room.
Behind a rotting desk, Blake found these ceiling-high shelves of mildewed books. It was the library of the Starry Wisdom sect, and this confirmed every single local rumor he had heard.
And this is the evidence that just flies in the face of the skeptic's charlatanry claim. This was a library of forbidden knowledge.
Blake recognized titles known only to the most obscure and dread-ridden scholars of the occult. These were not books you find in a public library.
He documented finding familiar, evil texts he had only ever studied academically, a Latin version of the abhorred Necronomicon.
Right, alongside other dreaded volumes like the Libriones, the Code de Ghoul of Conterlet, the Unosprichlichen Kulten of Van Junst, and Ludwig Prinz de Vermis Miserius.
And you have to understand, these are not books about ghosts or local hauntings. These are manuals for understanding and interacting with cosmic entities.
There are also volumes he knew only by reputation. The Nicotic Manuscripts, the Book of Xian, and most tellingly, he found a crumbling volume in characters he couldn't even identify.
But it had shudderingly recognizable occult symbols inside.
His conclusion was immediate, and it was terrifying. This place was the seat of an evil older than mankind and wider than the known universe. The threat wasn't local, it was existential.
From a rotting desk in that same room, Blake grabs a small leather-bound record book. This is the cryptographic ledger.
And the script was incredibly complex. Traditional symbols from astronomy, from alchemy, astrology, the sun, moon, planets, zodiac signs, they were all massed together in text, suggesting each symbol was a replacement for an alphabetical letter.
He knew right then he had to decipher this thing to understand the full extent of the evil he had just stumbled into.
With that historical context now literally in his hands, Blake keeps going. He continues his ascent up the choked spiral staircase to the tower.
He was expecting to find bells, but instead he finds a 15-foot square room that was clearly devoted to vastly different purposes. This was the heart of the cult.
The setup was purely ritualistic. 7 high-backed Gothic chairs were arranged in a rough circle, and lining the walls were 7 colossal, crumbling, black-painted plaster images.
And he said they chillingly resembled the cryptic megaliths of Easter Island. Again, that visual language just screams of worship of some remote, non-human civilization.
But the centerpiece was the most important thing. In the center of the floor stood a 4-foot-tall, curiously angled stone pillar covered in these bizarre, unrecognizable hieroglyphs.
And resting on top of it was the asymmetrical metal box, its hinged lid thrown back, open.
Inside that box was the object of ultimate power and danger. The shining trapezahedron.
It's described as a nearly black, red-striated polyhedron, about 4 inches across, and it was held suspended by a metal band.
Blake was immediately gripped by what he called an almost alarming fascination, a powerful psychological pull he just couldn't resist.
He felt the stone was strangely transparent, that it was showing hair-formed worlds of wonder within.
And the visions it projected into his mind were instant and they were terrifying. Alien orbs with great stone towers, Titan mountains with no mark of life, and remoter spaces where only a stirring and vague blacknesses told of the presence of consciousness and will.
This stone was a communication device. It was a window into cosmic realms far, far beyond Earth. It implies the cult wasn't just summoning ghosts. They were communicating with interstellar intelligence.
As he finally looks away from this mesmerizing, incredibly dangerous window, he notices a singular mound of dust in the far corner near the ladder to the steeple.
And this, just shockingly, was the remains of a human being.
The victim was quickly identified as Edwin M. Lillibridge, the very same reporter who disappeared 42 years earlier in 1893.
And his identity was verified. Remnants of a gray suit, round cuff buttons, an old stick pin, a celluloid advertising calendar for the year 1893.
And the absolute smoking gun, a reporter's badge from the Providence Telegram.
This single discovery completely demolishes the skeptic's theory of a simple hoax. A real person, a reporter, went missing while investigating this cult, and his remains were found right here.
And finding his body was only part of the story. Lillibridge's crumbling leather pocketbook, it contained these penciled memoranda, and they provided the definitive timeline of the Starry Wisdom sect.
The notes confirmed it all. The church was bought by a man named Enoch Bowen in 1844, and warnings about the sect began immediately. The shining trapezohedron was first mentioned in 1846.
The notes also confirmed the rising terror in the community. Disappearances in 1846 and 1848, the latter being when, and I quote, stories of blood sacrifice began.
And the most important piece of intelligence came from a Father O'Malley, quoted directly in Lillibridge's notes. He said the sect called up something that can't exist in light.
This entity, O'Malley had learned, flees even a little light and has to be summoned again by gazing at the crystal. The sect actually claimed the stone shows them heaven and other worlds, and that the haunter of the dark tells them secrets.
So Blake now knew the full narrative. The Starry Wisdom cult, the reporter's murder, the existence of a light-averse entity, and the specific mechanism for summoning it, the trapezohedron, were all horrifyingly real.
But what exactly killed Lillibridge?
The state of his remains suggests an absolutely unnatural end. The bones were scattered, some were oddly dissolved, others were yellowed with vague suggestions of charring.
And the skull, most horrifyingly, had a distinct, charred aperture in the top, as if it had been struck by a powerful acid or some kind of intense, focused energy.
This cannot be overstated. That charred aperture in Lillibridge's skull, 40 years before Blake's death, is physical, undeniable evidence of an entity existing in that church that kills with heat or some kind of acidic energy.
It just sinks the nervous shock theory entirely.
And it was precisely this evidence, the remains and the notebook, that snapped Blake out of his cosmic trance. He was overcome by pure, rational panic.
He sensed a formless alien presence close to him and watching him with horrible intentness. He knew in that moment that he was entangled with something that had looked through it at him and would now ceaselessly follow him.
He noted a faint luminosity in the stone as the twilight started to wane, which confirms its self-illuminating nature in the dark. Acting on pure instinct, he slammed the metal box's cover shut over the glowing stone.
Yeah, click. That was the sound of the cage door shutting, but it was also the signal for the beast.
At the noise, a soft, stirring sound seemed to come from the steeple's eternal blackness overhead beyond the trapdoor.
Blake didn't wait around to rationalize it. He didn't wonder if it was rats or something else. That sound sent him into a terrified flight, crashing back down the spiral stairs and out onto the civilized streets of Providence.
But he was marked. The clock had started ticking on his fate.
The weeks after Blake's intrusion, they were a period of just feverish, isolated work. Blake knew he had to understand the history of the object he had just awakened.
So he throws himself into deciphering that cryptographic ledger he had stolen from the vestry room.
By June, he has this monumental intellectual breakthrough, albeit one that's steeped in absolute terror. The language of the ledger, he discovers, is the dark Aklo language.
And for our listeners, this is not a terrestrial language. It's not Latin or Greek. Within Blake's framework, Aklo is a tongue known only to certain ancient cults. It's a language that speaks directly to the horrific concepts of cosmic evil.
And Blake's diary entries after he cracks the code, they're sparse, but they are just thick with terror. The Aklo text confirms the identity of the entity he had sensed.
The haunter of the dark, awakened by gazing into the trapezohedron, which held all knowledge and demanded monstrous sacrifices.
He also immediately recognized the one and only thing that was protecting him, the city streetlights. He wrote that they formed a protective bulwark which cannot be crossed.
The entity was trapped in that dark steeple, as long as the power stayed on.
The Aklo ledger also provided the stone's chilling cosmic history, a chronology that completely, utterly dwarfs human existence.
We learned the shining trapezohedron was not made on Earth. It was fashioned on dark Yuggoth, a planet or a realm far outside our solar system.
He was then brought to Earth by the Old Ones, a civilization of non-human ancient intelligence that came long before humanity. It was treasured by the crinoid things of Antarctica and later salvaged by the serpent men of Volusia.
When you hear these names, Yuggoth, serpent men, crinoid things, the key insight for you to take away is that this stone is a cosmic weapon. It's a tool used across unimaginable gulfs of space and time.
The horror Blake was facing wasn't supernatural in the traditional sense. It was fundamentally alien, indifferent to our physics.
The history continues. The stone was peered at in Lemuria by the very first human beings, and it was associated with the temple of the evil pharaoh Neferka.
Whose name was violently stricken from all monuments because of the unspeakable, unholy rites he performed around the stone. This single artifact links multiple epochs of prehistory and non-human intelligence. It confirms the universal malignancy Blake had only just glimpsed.
But despite this staggering, world-ending danger, Blake really struggled with these severe conflicting emotions. He knew his duty was to bury the stone, to let daylight into that steeple, and permanently banish the thing he had evoked.
But he also felt a perverse addiction, a morbid longing to go back to the tower and gaze again into its cosmic secrets.
That's a classic component of this kind of psychological siege, isn't it? The cosmic knowledge, even though it's terrifying, it's also intoxicating.
It's like an addiction to the absolute truth of the universe. He wants to save himself, but the trapezohedron is still reaching into his mind. It's drawing him back.
This internal struggle then breaks violently into the physical world in July. On the morning of July 17th, a tremendous thunderstorm hits Providence.
And it knocks out the city's power for a full, terrifying hour.
In that hour of absolute blackout, the fear on Federal Hill just erupted into physical reality. The local residents, mostly the Italians living near the church, they reported hearing definite physical flopping and bumping sounds.
This confirms the thing in the steeple was venturing down into the body of the church. It was moving.
And critically, as the power stuttered back on, they heard the sound of shattering glass coming from the tower.
Which confirmed the entity's limitation. It could move freely in absolute darkness, but the returning light, even the feeble light trickling through the grime-blackened, louver-boarded windows, was too much for it. It forced it to violently retreat, to slither back into the tenebrous steeple.
The residents responded instantly. Terrified crowds clustered around the church, maintaining the spontaneous guard of light with shielded candles and lanterns to protect the city from the nightmare that stalks in darkness.
The entity was real, it was present, and it was actively being contained only by the city's electrical grid.
This incident finally spurred some official action, though the reporters went in looking for, a whimsical news story, assuming it was just vandalism.
What they found, however, was shocking physical proof that validated everything in Blake's diary.
They crawled in through that same cellar window and found the dust in the nave, and the vestibule was plowed up in a singular way. This confirmed the movement of a large, heavy object, not a man.
There was a bad odor everywhere, along with yellow stains and charred patches. The same kind of chemical or thermal damage that was observed on Lillibridge's remains 40 years earlier.
And the physical evidence just kept coming on the staircase. The narrow spiral stairs had been wiped roughly clean, implying the entity, or something acting under its influence, had recently moved up and down them.
In the tower room itself, the 7 Gothic chairs were overturned. But strangely, the investigators, they failed to mention finding the box, the stone, or the skeleton.
Blake later surmised that the entity, or its influence, had removed the critical pieces of evidence. It relocated them to the only safe, absolutely dark space, the steeple above.
But the most disturbing evidence of intelligence in action was the damage to the windows. All 4 lancet windows were broken.
And 2 of them had been crudely blocked using satin pew linings and cushioned horsehair.
This suggests a chilling intention, not just chaos. This ancient darkness is intelligent enough to understand its own weakness light, and it actively tried to restore the tower to absolute blackness when the lights came back on.
It was preparing its environment for the next opportunity. It was making the blackout not just a passive event, but an opportunity to attack.
The reporters also noted yellowish stains and charring on the ladder leading to the steeple trap door. This confirmed the entity's hasty retreat into the black, fetid space above.
The threat was no longer abstract. It was physical, it was intelligent, and it was actively preparing for a sustained return.
And the events of July 17th just completely annihilated what was left of Blake's composure. His diary from this point on, it just reflects mounting frantic apprehension.
He's chastising himself for not destroying the stone when he had the chance. He started making these desperate, frantic calls to the electric company during thunderstorms, pleading with them to take drastic, unprecedented precautions against power lapses.
His concern focused intensely on the missing box and stone, which he correctly assumed had been removed by the lurking horror and hidden up in the absolute blackness of the steeple.
And even more terrifyingly, that psychic connection he had established by gazing into the trapezohedron, it just intensified. He felt a constant tugging at his will, a deep, Unholy psychic rapport was established between his mind and the entity in that distant steeple.
It knew where he was, and it was reaching out.
This psychological siege reached its breaking point the week after July 30th. Visitors noted these heavy cords he kept near his bed. He explained that sleepwalking had forced him to bind his ankles nightly to prevent him from automatically walking down College Hill toward the west.
He was being compelled, physically and mentally, to return to the church.
His diary describes the horrifying experience of the night of July 30th. He woke up violently, found himself groping about in an almost black space, assaulted by an overpowering fetor, the entity's signature stench, and hearing soft, furtive sounds above him.
He was back in the church.
He stumbled over things, and he recognized the scene when his hands encountered the stone pillar with a vacant top. This confirmed the box and the stone were still gone.
He found the ladder, and he began climbing toward a region of intenser stench where a hot, searing blast beat down against him.
This heat, this searing blast, it connects directly back to the charring found on Lillibridge's remains and all the scorch marks in the nave.
And even without the physical stone, the cosmic visions flooded his mind. He was exposed to the ancient legends of ultimate chaos, featuring the blind idiot god Azathoth, Lord of all things.
For those unfamiliar, Azathoth represents the ultimate source of cosmic chaos. It's mindless, chaotic, yet it's the progenitor of all existence in this terrifying mythos. Blake was receiving the full, unexpurgated truth of the universe right before his inevitable end.
He was moments from being claimed. His escape was just pure dumb luck. A sharp report from the outer world, maybe fireworks for a local event. It broke his stupor.
He shrieked, dropped from the ladder, and fled blindly down the spiral stairs.
And the physical evidence confirmed the reality of his terror and its consequences. He woke up bruised, covered in dirt and cobwebs, and critically, he found his hair was badly scorched.
And there was a distinct trace of that strange, evil odor still clinging to his clothing.
Whatever he had faced had physical, thermal properties. The skeptics could no longer claim this was all just psychological.
The final storm, the one that marked the catastrophe, it broke just before midnight on August 8th. The rain was torrential, the lightning was constant, Blake's protector and his ultimate threat all at once.
Blake was frantic. He was sitting at his desk, staring out the window, scribbling these frenzied diary notes that just got larger and more nervous as the night went on.
He was desperately trying to keep his grip on reality. The lights must not go. It knows where I am. And finally, I must destroy it. His determination, of course, was far too late.
Then, at 2:12 a.m., according to the Powerhouse records, the lights went out all over the city.
Blake's final legible entry before the collapse simply read, "Lights out, God help me."
And simultaneously, over on Federal Hill, the local crowd had gathered. They were desperately holding their vigil, blessing each flash of lightning.
But a sudden rising wind blew out most of their candles and lanterns, plunging the square into darkness just as the main city power failed. The stage was set for the entity's final coordinated attack.
For what happened next at 2:35 a.m., we have definitive eyewitness testimony from a Father Merluzzo, a patrolman Monahan, and 78 other watchers.
The dull fumbling sounds inside the Black Tower, they swelled dramatically. The vague exhalation of evil odor became emphatic and offensive, and it choked the onlookers.
Then came the sound of splintering wood, a large, heavy object crashing into the yard below. It was the smoke-grimed louver boarding of the tower's east window, destroyed from within.
The entity had successfully eliminated the final barrier of light and was free.
An utterly unbearable fear then welled forth, sickening the crowd. The air trembled with a distinct vibration, as of flapping wings.
And then, in the absolute blackness, the upward-looking spectators thought they glimpsed it. A great spreading blur of denser blackness shooting with meteor-like speed toward the east.
They tracked the impossible unseen speed of the attack as it flew directly toward College Hill.
Moments later, the cosmic and the electrical forces collided. A tremendous lightning bolt struck College Hill. It was followed by an intolerable stench and an inexplicable upward rush of air that literally stripped leaves from the trees.
This was the exact time and the exact location where the Titan blur was sighted and where Robert Blake was waiting.
Blake's neighbors found him the following morning. He was sitting rigid and bolt upright at his desk, eyes glassy and bulging, his features twisted in stark convulsive fright.
He had prolonged his frenzied jottings to the very end. The broken pencil was still clutched in his hand.
And his final entries, scrawled large and highly disjointed, they offer this terrifying glimpse into his final emerging consciousness. The phrases suggest the lightning, which he had hoped would save him by illuminating the world, was instead the mechanism of his destruction.
It was somehow inverted by the presence of the entity.
He wrote, "The lightning seems dark and the darkness seems light." His entire understanding of reality was completely inverted.
He recognized the entity's lineage. He questioned, is it not an avatar of Nyarlathotep?
And for our listeners, Nyarlathotep, within this cosmic framework, is the messenger, the soul of the outer gods. It often takes human form to manipulate and to deliver ultimate horror.
He referenced the stone's cosmic origin one last time. I remember Yugoth, and more distant Shagai, and the ultimate void of the black planets. He had absorbed the stone's history entirely. It was part of him now.
And then came the devastating realization of the entity's true nature. It was tied to the cosmic knowledge he had absorbed through the stone.
He wrote, the long, winging flight through the void cannot cross the universe of light, recreated by the thoughts caught in the shining trapezohedron.
And this is the critical insight. The entity may not have a fixed physical form in our dimension. It is recreated by the knowledge held within that stone. It's shaped by the thoughts and feels of those who gaze into it.
And Blake, by absorbing that ultimate truth, had created the perfect vehicle for the entity to reach him. It flew the root of the information he had stolen.
The barriers, both physical and mental, they just collapsed entirely. He wrote, "Sense of distance gone, far is near, and near is far. I am it, and it is I want to get out, must get out, and unify the forces."
His consciousness was being claimed, was being assimilated by the entity, and he was both the victim and the eager participant in this unification of cosmic forces.
And the final terrifying fragments, describing the arrival of the thing that had looked through the stone moments before the lightning strike.
I see it coming here. Hellwind Titan, blur black wings. Yog-Sothoth save me, the three-lobed burning eye.
Yog-Sothoth, whom he calls upon for salvation, is another incomprehensible cosmic entity, often described as the gate and the key to all dimensions. By naming these entities, Blake confirmed that his last moments were spent witnessing a horrifying spectacle of cosmic reality that no human mind was ever built to contain.
And the three-lobed burning eye is the signature of the thing that finally claimed him.
So, we have reached the end of the documented timeline of the Federal Hill horror. Let's try to synthesize the evidence now, moving beyond that simple verdict of nervous shock.
Okay. We know Robert Blake died under circumstances that just defy conventional explanation. His final moments were recorded in a diary that accurately predicted the nature of his own attack.
We know an ancient cult, Starry Wisdom, existed and employed these sophisticated, non-terrestrial devices.
We know the reporter Lillibridge vanished there, and his remains showed signs of unnatural chemical or thermal charring and dissolution. That's proof of the entity's physical existence decades before Blake ever arrived.
We know the church structure was physically violated by something seeking absolute darkness. We have the broken and blocked windows, the scraping sounds that terrified the local community.
And we know that the curiously angled stone, the trapezohedron, was certainly self-luminous in the darkness, confirming its unique properties, and was retrieved from the steeple where it had been hidden.
And most importantly, we have the action of Dr. Dexter. He was so convinced of the stone's reality and its danger that he defied official censure and destroyed the primary piece of evidence, throwing the trapezohedron into Narragansett Bay.
That act of radical belief is the most potent refutation of the hoax theory you could ask for.
So the core question remains, if Blake's death was merely nervous shock, how do we account for the scorched hair he sustained during his sleepwalking episode? How do we account for the charred skull of Lillibridge? How do we account for the violently plowed-up dust of the nave after the lights failed?
And most critically, the synchronized Titan blur of denser blackness, seen by dozens of witnesses flying toward College Hill just before the final, fateful lightning strike.
The skeptic clings to coincidence and pathology, but the believer has to acknowledge that Blake was killed by the Haunter of the Dark, which was momentarily banished by the physical force of the lightning, but only after it had successfully reached Blake and unified its terrifying consciousness with his, just as his final notes imply.
And that leads us to the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. And it comes straight from Blake's own frenzied writing. The entity was recreated by the thoughts caught in the shining trapezohedron.
So if that stone was truly a window on all time and space, holding the knowledge of Yugoth, Volusia, Azathoth, and Yog-Sothoth, and Robert Blake's mind absorbed that cosmic key,
what terrifying self-aware horror might still linger, not in the dark steeple, but in the abyss of the human consciousness that now carries that immense, destructive knowledge across the void? something to mull over the next time the lights go out.